Right, we back in here. Chelsea 1, Pika nil, and Red Card FC secures 3 points. Finally. Honestly, I found it hilarious that João Pedro ended that match for Chelsea with a red card. Sure, some of you watching thought that as well. Hopefully. Honestly, I thought it was just the most fitting way to finally end our mini slump of a few games without a win. In any case, it's good to finally be back on the winning track. Performance honestly wasn't very good. If I'm being honest, it wasn't the best viewing. Unfortunately, there was a lot of rotation, to be fair. Some players that were in the squad and in the 11 were tired or carrying knocks or whatever the case may be. So I think for me personally, the 3 points was more important than seeing the team play well. Just because, against Brighton, the team looked bright and on top until the red card happened. And then against Manchester United, I would have imagined that it would have been the same thing considering their form. And so for me personally, it was just important to get out of this match week with 3 points on the board and moving up in the Champions League table. To start with, I want to look at the starting lineup. I guess the big surprise was Tyreek George starting at striker. Looks like João Pedro, that knock that Enzo Maresca mentioned, was serious enough to have him come off the bench. But I think, honestly, more importantly, is that he was available for Liverpool because it's so early in the Champions League campaign that if there were 2 games to start with where Chelsea were to drop points, there's opportunities later on to make that up. But with the way Chelsea have done in the Premier League the past couple of weeks, falling so far behind Liverpool so early in the season, it was probably more important that João Pedro was fully fit, hopefully, to start that match. And it looks like he had that thought with a couple other players as well, which we will get into. But in any case, other than that, it was kind of par for the course as expected, with the exception of maybe Buonanotte playing as the 10 as opposed to Estevao. But again, I think that was more of a decision eyeing that Liverpool match at the weekend. Other than that, that issue coming in, Chalobah, I predicted would start in this match, considering the fact that he was suspended for the Liverpool game. And then other than that, Garnacho thought he would be given an opportunity to start this match as well. And he looked pretty bright for the most part until he was subbed off. Other than that, Mark Guiu, just a note on him. It's clear, I think, in my opinion, that he's just a break in case of emergency type of striker for Chelsea from now until the transfer window, the January transfer window, where hopefully we see Liam Delap return to full fitness. And the reason I mentioned that January window is if he plays Mark Guiu, if he plays for Chelsea from now until then, well, then he can't go on loan elsewhere and secure minutes and playing time, which was the original idea of him playing for Sunderland. And it just so happened that he played a game and then Liam Delap gets hurt with a long-term injury. Nico Jackson on his way out. Circumstances aligned for him to come back to the club. It's kind of weird, though, because on deadline day, if you guys remember, Tyreek George, his deal was on the verge of being completed to Fulham, and it was due to Harry Wilson not completing a move to Leeds or something like that he didn't move. But when that fell through, maybe they just recalled Mark Guiu first and then Tyreek George, but it turns out that the situation is that Tyreek George is now the player gaining those minutes at striker when João Pedro isn't available in this period without Liam Delap. And so Mark Guiu is left out in the cold. And even though he's the more natural fit for the number 9 position. But who knows? I don't see Mark Guiu logging a minute, honestly, until he goes on loan again. Barring some tragic João Pedro injury or something like that. Like, I think even if Tyreek George was unavailable for whatever reason, I think at this point the manager would probably play Pedro Neto as a striker or Cole Palmer if he's back fully fit after the international break as a false nine or whatever it is. So in any case, um, just a quick stat on the lineup as well. It's the seventh different back four in 9 games that we've seen from Chelsea. A lot of chopping and changing, some injuries, issues with form. Nechu, Trevor Chalobah, although I think for the most part he's been decent. And yeah, it's kind of like when I envisioned this first match in the Champions League after a few years, I imagined a much stronger lineup, and unfortunately that's not the case. Getting into the match itself, from the get-go, Chelsea had the majority of possession. Benfica, I guess as expected under one Jose Mourinho, were sitting off, allowing for Chelsea to maintain possession. The one difference that I noticed immediately was that what Crystal Palace and Brentford did really well against Chelsea is that when they progressed the ball to the halfway line, in and around that, and the center backs were recycling possession, instead of sitting off and allowing themselves to be pinned back, they would then press. They would trigger the press and force the ball back to the keeper, who then would have to go long. In this game, Benfica just didn't mind conceding that sort of possession to Chelsea. I don't know if they didn't think they had the ability to press in that sort of way. I know the commentating and some of the comments that I saw was that they were going through a few injuries themselves. One natural winger fully fit or something like that. But in any case, they just were like, hey, we're going to sit back and hope and expect that Chelsea don't create much in terms of the moving forward, and then we can hit them on the break. In all honesty, it wasn't a bad game plan. Chelsea, while on top and looked decent, weren't necessarily creating the best chances. Even in the first half an hour when they looked on top, it just didn't seem like they were threatening all that much. Maybe it's just because they're playing a makeshift striker, and a striker who is, I believe, 19 or 20 years old, and then the attacking midfielder in behind him, same age, both of them making their Champions League debut at home. Maybe it's a lot of pressure in that case, but it seemed a little toothless, shall I say. But getting into the first goal that ended up being an own goal by Richard Rios, who was Esteval's teammate in Palmeiras, coincidentally. It was due to a ball from Pedro Neto from the right-hand side, playing a ball to the back post to Alejandro Garnacho, who was able to get onto the end of it and play it back into the box, and Richard Rios mistimes his clearance and kicks the ball into his own net. And honestly, that play specifically, not necessarily the cross from Pedro Neto, but Alejandro Garnacho being available on the back post, was kind of there. We saw a few minutes earlier, if anybody noticed that chance that Alejandro Garnacho took down with his chest and then kind of scuffed the chance wide. When the ball was played into him in the back post, Richard Rios himself pointed out to his right back. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. Pointed out to his right back to go and mark that far post. And maybe the right back just wasn't aware or didn't realize that Garnacho would be that wide and away from him. And so he was free in that opportunity, and Chelsea took advantage of it a few minutes later, en route to the opening goal. And from then on, we saw a couple other chances. Pedro Neto, I think right before that, he had a shot from outside the box around the similar range where he scored against Arsenal last season in that 1-1 draw that he pulled just wide. It was unfortunate for him, but it was, a decent sign that there was some potential for chances there. On the Benfica side, going forward in the counterattack, I thought Luke Bacchio was probably their best player of the three in that first half. That front three, Pavlidis and the Ukrainian Sudakov, I think is how you pronounce it. But he was giving Marco Correa a little bit of trouble with his pace. I seem to remember him getting past Marco Correa down the line and cutting the ball into the box to Pavlidis that Trevor Chalobah does well to get in the way of and is able to clear it. And that's kind of what their idea was for that first half, was to just absorb pressure and hit Chelsea on the counter. Towards the end of that first half, Tyreek George had a chance in which it was a pretty tough chance for him. He was reaching out and kind of snatched at it a little bit, went straight to the keeper. It was just an unlucky situation. I thought maybe he deserved a goal for it if he would have gotten better contact. But in any case, I thought this was probably one of his best games as a striker, barring that Lincoln City game where he had the goal and the assist, just because that was much lower level of competition. So, but in terms of the competition that I think is a lot closer to Chelsea's level, this was probably his best cameo as a striker this season, at least for the club. And my thoughts, going into the second half was that it's positive, but it's only 1-0. And 1-0 for Chelsea, as we saw against Brighton, is not a safe enough lead when you are red card of C. Luckily, that red card didn't happen until later. We'll get into it in a second. But 1-0 is never a safe lead, especially with the way Benfica looked a little dangerous on the counter. And in the second half, they came out a lot more positive with midfield runners going into the box. That number 8 for Benfica, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name either, but he had a couple runs into the box that were just offside that he could have gotten on the end of. It forced a save out of Robert Sanchez, I believe, one of those offside chances that was a very good save. And so that's kind of what it was. Benfica weren't afraid to press Chelsea higher up the pitch to try to force mistakes, which we know this back line and keeper have that in him and them. And so it was shaping up to be a little bit of a nervy second half if Chelsea didn't get that second goal, which they ultimately never did. And we saw the one thing, the ref was not very good at all. Bonanate got a yellow to start the second half on a clean tackle. I get that the ref didn't have the right angle for it, but to give a yellow for that challenge, I think that was just abhorrent. That was a completely wrong decision. And as a result, they kind of robbed Bonanate from getting the ability to continue on in this match, because he got subbed in like the 52nd, 53rd minute, something like that, for Estevao. And I have to say, immediately when Estevao came on, he looked a lot brighter than any of the attackers did. Dribbling wise, carrying the ball, and throughout the second half, I thought he was very bright. It didn't result in many clear-cut chances, but you can see why he's very highly rated. And I keep banging on that he's ready to go immediately and should be in contention for the first 11 all the time at this point. Moving forward, 61st minute, João Pedro and Jamie Gittins in for Tyreek George and Garnacho. I thought that both of them put on a decent shift. They were the two causes for our best chances that we saw in this match. Tyreek George, that save he forced the keeper to make to end the first half, and then the own goal that Richard Rios has obviously came from that back post run from Garnacho where he was wide, as I mentioned previously. Immediately, João Pedro, I think probably with his first action of the second half, gets a yellow. I saw a bad angle of that replay, so I don't know whether truly it was a yellow or not, but when you get a yellow that early, it's kind of weird. You have to be on edge, but you're not yet in the flow of the game. And so it's a little bit of a weird tightrope that you have to walk on in terms of joining in at an intense level and then washing yourself from going too far defensively, especially. And so I'm glad it held off until the end. As for chances for Chelsea moving forward, Estevao almost had a goal himself. I think it was a ball from Enzo Fernandez, like a tipped cross onto Estevao's head, who made a good run. And it was just kind of difficult. It was a little high for Estevao. He kind of had to reach back to head the ball, and it just happened to go. I don't remember if it went to the keeper and forced a save or went over, something of that nature. But it was bright, and you'd like to see more of those creative runs from midfielders, which I don't think necessarily Buonanotte provides in the same way that Estevao or João Pedro, if he was playing as a 10, or Cole Palmer in that position, or Enzo Fernandez or whoever. I think just Buonanotte is not comfortable enough making those runs. And so we didn't see them as much before that change was made. As for subs moving forward, 81st, 82nd minute, something like that, Badiashile came off, as did Malo Gusto for Reece James and Josh Achampong. I would imagine that Badiashile sub was mainly due to maybe not him being fully fit, but also needing him for Liverpool. I think he's bang on going to be one of the center backs for the Liverpool game at the weekend. And so that was a little bit of protecting him. As for the Malo Gusto sub, I just think that's kind of a typical sub you see. Rarely do either of these players kind of finish 90 minutes when both of them are at full fitness. They both kind of are interchangeable at this point. Although it's clear Reece James is obviously the first choice right back. He's not at the point yet where he can be fully trusted game in and game out twice a week, 90 minutes. And Malo Gusto, while he doesn't look good to start the season, he hasn't been bad, but he certainly has the quality to be a first choice right back for a lot of teams across Europe. And so relegating him to strictly second choice right back, I just think wouldn't be fair for the type of quality he potentially has. We didn't see a Ronaldo chop on the breakaway from him. So I guess that's a step forward from what we saw against Brighton. I digress. In any case, that last 10-15 minutes was a little bit nervy. A lot of corners from Benfica. Pressure was being piled on a bit. I think that's partly what contributed to that Reece James sub. I think if it was more comfortable, Malo Gusto might have played the full 90. Considering there wasn't much of a cushion there, I think just bringing on a more defensively solid right back at that point was smart from the manager. I thought it was the right sub. And so ultimately, Chelsea see it out. As for basically the last action of the game, João Pedro with the high foot gets a second yellow to a red. It wouldn't be a Chelsea match in 2025, I guess, at this point, without someone in blue earning a red card. Now, he's going to be available for Liverpool, obviously. Hopefully, he's fully fit for that match. But he will miss the Champions League game against Ajax, I believe. I think that match is at home. It looks looking like early now that Tyreek George is going to get another start at striker, so we'll see how that goes. Unless Pedro Neto plays at striker or whatever. But yeah, decent win in terms of the fact that he needed the 3 points under any circumstances. More important than the performance, as I previously stated. And so ultimately, I come away from the match happy enough. Move forward with. Looking ahead a little bit to the Liverpool match. As I said, Badiashile is going to be the nailed on center back, I think, one of the center backs. And then I think it'll be either Josh Achampong or Jorel Hato. Considering the fact that Wesley Fofana is in concussion protocol and Robert Chalobah is suspended for the match. And then obviously we know about the long injury to Levi Colwill. And so I think Badiashile, for his presence in the air and his strength, will be that nailed on center back. And then if I had to guess now, I think it'll be Josh Achampong, for the simple reason that I don't think the manager would want to play two left footers in the back unless he doesn't have to, especially considering that Benoit Badiashile isn't necessarily the most comfortable playing with his right foot, passes with his right foot. And Jorel Hato, while he's looked decent so far, I'm not sure such a high pressure match is the best way for him to play as a center back in this game, where you're not going to be on top of the match, being able to gain some chemistry and comfortable and becoming comfortable with your teammates in the back. This is not the match for that, I think, or at least I would think. Um, the other thing is no Andrey Santos. It looks like his injury, didn't even make the squad. So he's not available for Liverpool. So I guess that means over the next few days, Rap, Romeo Lavia, and Bubble Wrap. He didn't see the field today. I'm happy he did not, because he is probably going to be much needed for that Liverpool game. And I think he's probably in contention to start, if I'm being honest. He's come in from the cold off an injury and started before in high pressure situations and has done well. And so I think there's a chance that that happens again on Saturday. I'll get into that when it comes to the match preview. But in any case, those are my thoughts for this match, and I appreciate you watching.